A guy at work asked me if my dad's retirement party was fun. I said, "What party?" He showed me the photos on his phone. 40 people were there. My brother gave a speech. My mom was crying. My sister was standing next to my dad, smiling. I was not in a single photo. That night I drove to my parents' house and said, "Great party, Dad. Looked like you had the perfect family there." His face went white. My mom started crying. I grabbed my jacket and left. Before I tell you everything that happened, drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from right now. If you have ever felt invisible in your own family, you are going to want to stay for every single word of this story. Hit like so more people can find this, and subscribe because what comes next is the part that changed everything for me. To understand why that moment in the break room hit me the way it did, you need to understand what kind of family I grew up in. There are 3 of us. Therian is the oldest, 7 years older than me. I am in the middle. Quinley is the youngest, 5 years younger than me. I am 35 years old. I have lived in Phoenix, Arizona my whole life, and so has my family. We all grew up in the same neighborhood, went to schools within a few miles of each other, and for a long time I thought proximity meant closeness. It took me most of my adult life to learn that those two things are not the same. Therian was the firstborn son. That meant something in our house. It meant his name came up first in every conversation about the kids. It meant his photo went on the wall in the living room before anyone else's. It meant when he did something at school, at work, or in his personal life, our parents talked about it, not just to each other, to everyone. Neighbors, relatives, people at church, people they ran into at the grocery store. Therian got a promotion, and somehow 12 people knew about it before I even heard it from him directly. Quinley was the baby. She was the youngest, the smallest, and my mother treated her with a kind of careful attention that I noticed from the time I was old enough to notice things. When Quinley was sick, everything stopped. My mother would cancel her plans, rearrange her schedule, and sit with Quinley for as long as it took. When Quinley was upset about something, my mother put down whatever she was doing and listened. When Quinley had a hard day at school, there was a whole conversation at dinner about it. My mother did not do those things out of malice. She genuinely loved Quinley that way. But love that specific, given to someone else that consistently, teaches you something when you are the one watching. I was the one in the middle, not the firstborn son my father had expectations for, not the youngest daughter my mother worried over. I was the one who was, in the word my family used more than any other word when they talked about me, fine. Odette is fine. Odette handles things. Odette does not need a lot of attention. Odette figures it out. I did not understand when I was young that being called fine was not a compliment. I thought it meant I was capable. It took me until my early 30s to understand that in my family, fine meant that no one was paying close enough attention to know whether I was actually fine or not. I want to give you the specific moments, not to make a list of grievances, but because the retirement party did not happen in a vacuum, and I want you to understand exactly what kind of ground it landed on. My high school graduation. My father had a work meeting that afternoon and said he could not move it. My mother came but left during the reception because Quinley had developed a fever and needed to be taken home. I walked across that stage, picked up my diploma, and looked out at the section where family was supposed to sit. The seats my parents had been in were empty by the time I got to that side of the gymnasium. I drove myself to a nearby ice cream place after, ordered 1 cone, and sat in my car in the parking lot and ate it alone. I was 17 years old. My first apartment. I was 23. I had spent 3 months saving every dollar I could from my job at the time, found a place, signed a lease, and arranged to move in on a Saturday in October. I asked my father if he could help me move a few pieces of furniture. He said he would try, but that day Therian needed a ride to the airport for a work trip, and it ran long. I asked my mother if she could come help me set up the kitchen. She said she was in the middle of planning a birthday party for Quinley and there was too much to do. I rented a small truck, moved everything myself, and had the whole place set up by late afternoon. No one called to check in. No one asked how it went. The first time anyone in my family saw that apartment was 3 months later when I had them over for Thanksgiving because I offered to host. My 30th birthday. I did not expect a party. I did not expect anything large. I had quietly hoped someone would call that morning. No one called in the morning. No one called in the afternoon. At 8 o'clock that evening my mother sent a text that said, "Happy birthday, honey, today got away from me." Therian did not text until the next day and said he had lost track of the date. Quinley texted just before midnight. My father did not contact me that day at all. He mentioned it the next time I saw him in person, said, "Oh right, your birthday was this week. and moved on to another topic. When I turned 30, I told myself it was fine. I was an adult. Adults did not need their parents to make a big deal out of their birthdays. I told myself that, and I believed it enough to get through the week. The car accident. It was not serious, but it was not nothing either. I was 28, driving home from work, and someone ran a red light and clipped the front of my car. My hands were shaking. I had a cut on my forearm from broken glass and a bruised knee from bracing against the dashboard. I sat on the side of the road and called my mother first. She picked up, asked if I was okay, and when I said I was at the hospital waiting to be checked out, she said she was with Quinley, who had just come out of a wisdom tooth procedure and was not doing well. She said she was sorry and that she would check in later. I called my father. He did not pick up. I sat in that waiting room for 3 hours by myself. A nurse asked me once if I had someone coming, and I said yes, because I did not want to explain that no, actually, no one was coming. The promotion, I was 33. I had been working toward a significant step up at the company I was with at the time, and when I got it, my salary went up by a large amount. I called my mother to tell her. She said, "That is so great, Odette," and then within 2 minutes she was telling me about something Thurian's manager had said to him at a recent review. The call lasted 7 minutes. When I hung up, I sat at my desk for a while, not crying, just sitting. I am telling you all of this because when Tavian showed me those photos, the shock I felt was not really about the party. It was about having proof. For the first time in my life, I had physical evidence of something I had known for a very long time but had never been able to point to directly. There were 40 people in those photos. My mother was crying from happiness. Thurian was standing at a microphone giving a speech about our father. Quinley was in the frame of every family photo. And I was nowhere, not in the background, not in a corner, nowhere. I had not been invited, I had not been told. No one had picked up a phone and called me to say, "Your father is retiring, we are throwing him a party, please come." That is the family I grew up in. And that is why that afternoon in the break room was not a small thing for me. It was the moment everything I had quietly known became something I could no longer pretend not to know. I need to walk you through that day in detail, because the details matter. It was a regular Tuesday. I had gotten to the office early, worked through the morning, and was walking through the break room on my way to the printer when Tavian looked up from his breakfast and said it. He said it the way you say something when you assume everyone already knows. The tone of someone making small talk, not dropping a bomb. "Hey, how was your dad's retirement party? Did you have a good time?" I stopped, I looked at him, I said, "What party?" Tavian put his fork down, his whole face changed. He said, "The retirement party, this past weekend." He said it slower the second time, the way people do when they are realizing something is wrong. I told him I did not know there had been a party. He looked at me for a moment, and then, because he is a decent person who was trying to be helpful and had no way of knowing what he was walking into, he picked up his phone and opened his photos. He said he had been at the party because his uncle was a longtime colleague of my father's. He said he thought I already knew he had been there. He handed me the phone. I stood in the break room of my workplace, and I looked at photos of my father's retirement party. The first photo was the venue set up, tables with white linens, purple and white flowers in the centerpieces, a banner across the back wall that said, "Congratulations on your retirement." It was not a small gathering. The room was full. The second photo was my father standing at the center of the room in a grey suit, smiling in a way I genuinely do not see often. He looked relaxed. He looked celebrated. He looked like a man surrounded by people who had shown up specifically for him. The third photo was Thurian at a microphone. He was looking toward my father. His face had that particular expression people get when they are saying something they actually mean. In the background of that photo, I could see rows of seated guests, all of them watching him. The fourth photo was my mother. She was seated at what looked like the family table, and she had both hands over her mouth and her eyes were wet. She was not performing emotion. She was genuinely moved. The fifth photo was Quinley and my father together, both of them laughing at something, mid-moment, comfortable and easy. The last photo was the family portrait, my father in the center, my mother beside him, Thurian on one side with his wife and their 2 children, Quinley on the other side, a complete family photo, every member of the family, except one. I handed Tavian his phone back. I told him thank you. I told him I appreciated him showing me, and I walked to the restroom and stood in front of the mirror. I did not cry. I counted to 15 in my head. I turned on the cold water, held both hands under it for a moment, then dried my hands and walked back to my desk. I sat at my desk for the rest of the day and I worked. I answered emails. I finished a report that was due by end of week. I did not call anyone. I did not text anyone. I did not go back to the break room. At 5 o'clock I shut down my computer, gathered my things and walked to my car. I sat in the car for a few minutes, then I drove to my parents' house. It takes about 20 minutes from my office. I did not play music. I did not make any calls. I drove and I thought. By the time I pulled up in front of their house, I had not decided what I was going to say. I only knew I was going to say something. The lights were on inside. Through the front window I could see the television was on and my father was in his chair. I sat in my car for 2 more minutes, then I got out. I knocked on the front door. My father opened it. The expression on his face when he saw me was genuine surprise, not the guilty kind of surprise that comes from someone expecting to be confronted, just surprise as if he had not been thinking about me at all. I did not step inside. I stood on the front step and I looked at him and I said, "Great party, Dad. Looked like you had the perfect family there." His face changed, the color left it, his mouth opened and nothing came out. My mother had come out from the kitchen when she heard the door. She was drying her hands on a dish towel. She saw my face and then she looked at my father's face and she understood immediately what was happening. She started crying before anyone said another word. I looked at my mother for a moment. Then I turned to the hook beside the door where I keep a jacket when I visit, picked it up and put it on. I pulled the door closed behind me as I left. Not hard, just shut. I drove home. I did not cry on the way. I got home, took a shower, cooked something simple for dinner, ate it at my kitchen table and went to bed. The next morning my mother called 7 times before noon. I did not answer. She sent a text that said, "Odette, please call me back, I want to explain." Thurian sent a message that said, "You need to calm down and think about how you are affecting Mom and Dad." Quinley sent a message that said, "They are getting older, you should not be making this harder on them." I read every message. I did not respond to any of them. 4 days later my father called. I picked up because I wanted to hear what he would say. He said, "I was meaning to call you about the party but things got busy and I lost track of it." I said, "I understand, Dad." Then I ended the call. That was the last time. I let that kind of answer be enough. In the weeks after that night, I made one decision that affected everything else. I stopped initiating contact with my family. I did not announce it. I did not send a message explaining what I was doing. I simply stopped being the one who reached out first. If my mother called, I answered. If my father called, I answered. If Thurian or Quinley reached out about something specific, I responded. But I stopped filling the silence. I stopped being the one who called to check in, who texted to say I was thinking of them, who showed up without being asked because I thought that was what family did. What happened next told me everything I needed to know. In the first 3 weeks my mother called twice. Thurian sent one text about a family dinner I was not explicitly invited to. Quinley did not reach out at all. My father called once, and when I picked up the call lasted less than 4 minutes. I had spent years being the one who kept the threads of connection alive, and it turned out that when I stopped doing that, the threads mostly just sat there. I used the time that opened up to do something I had been putting off for 2 years. I enrolled in the coursework and testing process to earn my journeyman electrician license, which is the certification required to do higher-level electrical work, and more importantly, to run my own operation. I had been working as a licensed electrician for several years at that point, but I had stayed at the level that let me keep a steady job with someone else's company. Getting the advanced certification meant I could set my own terms. I studied after work. I studied on weekends. I studied on Saturday mornings when I used to spend time on the phone with my mother talking about things that left me feeling like I had not actually said anything real. I passed the exam after 4 months of preparation. 2 weeks after I passed, I started seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Nwachukwu. She was a Nigerian-American woman in her early 50s who had been practicing for over 20 years. She spoke carefully and without any wasted words, and from the first session I understood that she was not going to tell me what I wanted to hear. She was going to help me figure out what was actually true. In our first session, I told her about the retirement party. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, she asked me a question I was not expecting. She said, "Were you surprised?" I sat with that for a moment. And then I said no, I was not surprised, I was just finally looking at proof. She said that was the most important thing I had said in the session. Over the following months, she helped me work through something I had been carrying without having the right words for it. There is a difference between being rejected and not being seen. Being rejected means someone knows you are there and actively chooses to exclude you. Not being seen means someone does not think to include you because they have never fully registered that you need to be included. My family did not hate me. They were not sitting around making decisions about how to leave me out. They had simply, over the course of my entire life, not made the habit of thinking about what I needed or wanted. They thought of me as the one who was fine, and fine people do not require much thought. Understanding that distinction did not make things hurt less, but it changed what I was actually dealing with. I was not fighting against active cruelty. I was trying to exist clearly in the minds of people who had spent decades treating my presence as optional. Dr. Nwachukwu also pointed out something about the way I had learned to move through the world. She said I had become so skilled at not needing things from people that I had made it easy for everyone around me to keep not giving them. My independence, which I had always thought of as a strength, had also functioned as a shield that protected the people around me from ever having to confront what they were not doing. 6 months after passing my journeyman exam, I registered Bright Line Electrical as a business. I put together a small amount of startup money, hired 2 assistants, and began taking residential contracts in the Phoenix area. The first few months were tight. There were weeks where I was doing the work, managing the books, answering the phones, and handling customer questions all on the same day. But the work came in, and then more work came in. On the first day I opened the doors of the small office space I rented. I brought a cup of coffee from home and a screwdriver. I hung the sign outside myself. It took about 10 minutes. No one was there to see it happen. When it was done, I went inside, sat at the desk, and started calling the people on my list. I did not need a celebration. I needed clients. Months passed. The business grew steadily. My sessions with Dr. Nwachukwu shifted from processing old pain to building clearer habits for how I wanted to live going forward. I started understanding the difference between family that shows up and family that assumes someone else will. I also stopped explaining myself to the members of my family who occasionally checked in with mild curiosity about what I was doing. When my mother asked about the business, I told her it was going well. When she pivoted to talk about Thurian, I let her. When the call ended, I put the phone down and went back to whatever I had been doing before. I was not angry anymore. I was building something, and the building required all of my attention. 18 months after the retirement party, Quinley called me. She started the conversation with the kind of warmth that meant she needed something. I recognized the tone because I had heard it before. She told me that our parents' 40th wedding anniversary was coming up, and the family was planning a celebration. She said she knew I was doing electrical and technical work professionally now, and she was wondering if I could come early and help set up the sound system, the lighting, and make sure everything was running correctly before the guests arrived. I let her finish. Then I said, "Quinley, I need to ask you something directly. Are you calling me as a family member or as a contractor?" She paused, then she said, "Both, I guess. You would be there anyway, so it makes sense." I said, "It does not make sense to me. If I come as a family member, I am a guest. If I come as a contractor, I submit an invoice. I am not doing both." She said, "I mean, obviously you would come as family." I said, "Then I will come as family. I will arrive at the time the other guests arrive. I will not bring equipment. I will not handle setup. I will attend as a member of this family." There was a silence, then she said that was fine. I dressed for that event the way I wanted to dress. I arrived at the time the invitation said. I walked in through the front entrance the same way every other guest did. When a neighbor of my parents stopped me near the door and said, "You're one of their children, aren't you?" "Which one?" I said, "I am Odette. The second one." She nodded and moved on, and I got myself something to drink and found a place to stand. My mother found me within the first 15 minutes. She came over with a look of visible relief which told me she had been worried I would not come at all. She said, "I am so glad you are here. I was not sure you would come." I said I would come. She looked at me for a moment and then said, "I owe you an apology, Odette, for the party, for a lot of things before that." I looked at her. I said, "I am listening." She said, "I did not think about how it would feel for you. I was focused on the logistics and I let myself believe it would be fine because you are always fine." I said, "I know that is what you believed." She waited for me to say more. I did not. I said, "Thank you for saying that. and I moved to another part of the room. Later in the evening, my father stepped outside to the side of the building where there was less noise. I followed him out because I wanted to have this conversation without an audience. He looked at me when I came through the door and he said, "I am glad you came tonight." I said, "I want to ask you something and I want an honest answer." He said, "Okay." I asked him, "Do you remember my 30th birthday?" He stood there for a moment. Then he said, "I am not sure I do." I said, "That is the answer I expected. That is also the problem." He looked down. I said, "I am not asking you to feel bad about one birthday. I am telling you that the birthday is one example of a pattern that has been there my whole life. You have never had to try to remember me because I have always been there regardless. I am telling you now that is going to be different going forward." He did not respond immediately. After a moment he said, "That is fair." I nodded. I said, "Good," and I went back inside. The conversation with Thurian was the one I had not planned for. He came to find me about an hour into the event, while people were eating and the noise level made private conversation difficult. He touched my arm and said, "Can we step somewhere quieter for a minute?" We moved to a hallway near the restrooms where it was less crowded. He stood there for a moment with his hands in his pockets and then he said, "I'm not good at this, but I need to say something." I waited. He said, "I knew about the retirement party before it happened. Dad mentioned it a few weeks before and asked me to help put together the guest list. I thought of you. I want you to know that. I actually thought of you and I did not say anything." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because it never occurred to me to advocate for you being there. I have spent my whole life watching you handle things on your own, and I never once stopped to think that maybe you did not want to handle everything on your own. I made myself believe you were fine because it was easier than asking." He looked at me directly and said, "That was wrong. It has been wrong for a long time and I am sorry." I looked at my brother. I had not expected this. I had come to this event prepared for my parents' half apologies and Quinley's awkwardness. I had not expected Thurian to walk up to me and say the true thing. I said, "I do not need you to be a perfect brother. I do not need big gestures. I need you to pick up the phone sometimes and ask how I am actually doing and then wait for the real answer." He said, "I can do that." I said, "Then that is where we start." He nodded. We stood there for another moment and then he said, "For what it is worth, the business is impressive. I looked it up." I said, "Thank you, Thurian," and we walked back into the room together. I stayed until the event ended. I did not help clean up. I said goodbye to my parents and to Thurian and to Quinley. When I got to my car, I sat there for a moment before starting the engine. I thought about the retirement party. I thought about the family photo with the empty space where I should have been. I thought about every birthday and graduation and moment where I had been the one who was fine. Then I started the car and drove home. It has been a little over 1 year since that anniversary party. Brightline Electrical now has 8 full-time employees. I signed a maintenance contract with a restaurant group in Phoenix that covers 7 locations. My revenue has more than doubled from where it was when I started. I moved into a larger office space last spring and put up a new sign, a bigger one, and this time I had 2 of my employees there to help, and we took a photo together afterward. I printed that photo, and it is on the wall in my office. Tavian, the coworker who showed me those photos in the break room, left the company we were both at and started working as an independent contractor. We ended up partnering on a solar installation project together about 6 months ago. He does not know that the conversation in the break room changed the direction of my life. Maybe one day I will tell him. For now, I am simply glad that decent people sometimes tell you hard truths without knowing that is what they are doing. My relationship with my family is not what it was, and it is not what I once imagined it could be. It is something more honest than either of those things. My father calls me on the first Sunday of every month. The calls are not long. He asks about the business and I tell him what is happening. He tells me about his retirement projects, the things he is fixing around the house, a class he has been taking. We do not talk the way people talk when they have decades of easy closeness, but we talk, and he calls first. My mother mailed me a birthday card this year. She mailed it 3 weeks before my birthday because she told me she was afraid she would forget if she waited. The card was handwritten. It was not long, but it was specific. She mentioned something I had told her on the phone months earlier. She had been listening. That was new. Thurian calls every few weeks. We have met for lunch 6 times in the past year. The first lunch was uncomfortable in the way first attempts at something real usually are. By the 4th time we met, it was easier. He asked about my business with the kind of questions that meant he had actually looked into what I do. I asked about his kids, and he told me things I actually did not know. We are not close the way siblings who grew up emotionally near each other are close, but we are in contact now in a way that is real. Quinley and I do not have a warm relationship. We are polite with each other at family events, and we do not have much contact in between. That is the honest answer. I do not think Quinley and I will ever be particularly close, and I have made my peace with that. This past year my father turned 65. My mother called me 4 weeks ahead of time and asked if I wanted to be part of the planning for a small birthday dinner. She asked my opinion before she made any decisions. She checked in twice in the weeks before to tell me what they had decided and to ask if anything needed to be changed. The dinner had 12 people. It was at the house. I arrived 45 minutes early to help set up. My father walked into the kitchen where I was arranging something on the counter, and he stopped at the doorway and watched me for a moment before saying anything. Then he said, "I am glad you are here, Odette." I said, "I am here, Dad," and I kept doing what I was doing. At the end of the night, someone suggested a family photo. All of us lined up. My father, my mother, Thurian, his wife, their children, Quinley and me. I stood in that photo because I was there and I belonged there, and no one had to remember to include me because I had already placed myself exactly where I was supposed to be. That is the difference between where I was and where I am now. I did not wait for my family to decide I was worth including. I built a life that did not require their permission to move forward. And somewhere in the process of doing that, the relationship with my family started shifting too, not because I demanded it, but because I stopped shrinking to fit the space they had assigned to me. If you are watching this and you recognize something in this story, if you are the one who is always fine, always handling things, always assumed not to need anything, I want to say something directly to you. The people around you have gotten comfortable believing that you do not need to be thought of. That comfort is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of how easy you have made it for them to overlook you. Stop making it easy. Not through anger and not through demands. Just stop filling all the space yourself and see what remains when you step back. Your value was never something your family assigned. It has always been yours. The only question is whether you are going to keep waiting for them to acknowledge it, or whether you are going to go live it in a way that leaves no room for doubt. I would really love to know if you have been in a situation where you felt invisible to your own family, or where you realized that the people closest to you had no real idea who you had become. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you are not subscribed yet, please do that now, because the next story I am going to tell you involves another moment where I had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping myself, and it pushed me even further than this one did. Thank you for being here and for listening all the way through. Take care of yourself this week. You are seen here, even if you have not always been seen everywhere else. Your worth was never theirs to assign, it was always yours to claim.